The dust rose in thick clouds around Teresa Sinclair's boots as she rode hard toward the sound that made every rancher's blood run cold. The thunder of hooves moving in blind panic. She had been delivering supplies to the outlying homesteads near Bentonville, Wyoming Territory, when she heard it, felt it through the ground itself, that rumbling that meant only one thing: cattle stampede. Without a second thought, she kicked her mare into a gallop, riding straight toward danger instead of away from it like any sensible person would do. But Teresa had never been accused of being too sensible, not since she arrived in Wyoming Territory 3 years ago in 1876, fleeing a life back east that had tried to cage her spirit. The herd came into view over the rise, a sea of panicked cattle thundering across the open range, their eyes rolling white with terror. Teresa could see a lone rider trying desperately to turn the leaders, but the animals were too far gone in their fear. She recognized the massive frame of the rider immediately. Ryder Dalton, the mountain man who had settled in these parts 5 years back, carved out a ranch at the base of the Bighorn Mountains with nothing but his own 2 hands and a will stronger than tempered steel. People said he had come down from trapping in the high country with enough money to buy land and stock it, but he kept mostly to himself, coming to town only when absolutely necessary. Teresa did not have time to wonder what had spooked his herd so badly. She could see the danger ahead that Ryder might not have spotted yet in his position. The cattle were running straight toward a ravine, one with a drop steep enough to kill every animal that went over. She had to turn them, had to redirect that river of horns and hooves before it was too late. She angled her mare to intercept the leaders, leaning low over the horse's neck as they flew across the prairie grass. Her heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline singing through her veins. This was madness, absolute madness, and she knew it. One wrong move and she would go down under those hooves, be trampled into the earth until there was nothing left to bury. But those cattle represented Ryder Dalton's entire livelihood, maybe his life savings, and she could not stand by and watch it all be destroyed. She pulled her rifle from its scabbard as she rode, firing into the air, the sharp cracks cutting through the thunder of hooves. At the same time, she began shouting, waving her hat in wide arcs. The lead steer's head turned slightly at the noise, and Teresa pressed her advantage, pushing her mare right into the path of the leaders. Her horse was terrified. She could feel it in every trembling muscle beneath her, but the animal trusted her, responded to her hands and legs and voice even as every instinct screamed to run. The leaders began to turn, just slightly, just enough. Teresa kept firing, kept shouting, her throat raw with the effort. She could see Ryder now on the other side, his face a mask of shock as he realized what she was doing. He immediately understood her plan and moved to help, pressing the cattle from his side, helping to curl them, to turn that straight stampede into a wide circle. It was working. God help her, it was actually working. The herd was bending, curling back on itself, the leaders following the new direction Teresa had forced them into. The cattle began to mill in confusion as the stampede lost its forward momentum, their panic beginning to break as they ran out of direction and purpose. Teresa's arms ached, her voice was nearly gone, and her mare was lathered in sweat and foam, but the cattle were slowing, stopping, the danger passing like a summer storm. She pulled her horse to a halt, chest heaving, hands shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. The ravine sat empty just 100 yards ahead, a silent testimony to the disaster that had been narrowly averted. Ryder Dalton rode toward her, and Teresa got her first clear look at the man she had only glimpsed from a distance in town. He was massive, even bigger than she had thought, with shoulders that seemed wide enough to block out the sun. His face was weathered and hard, carved by wind and sun and the harsh realities of mountain life, with a dark beard covering his jaw and eyes the color of a winter sky. He had to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had faced down bears and blizzards and come out the other side. "Woman, you have either the biggest heart or the smallest brain I have ever encountered," he said as he pulled his horse alongside hers, but there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of stunned amazement. "You could have been killed. Should have been killed, riding straight into a stampede like that. Your cattle were about to go over that ravine," Teresa replied, her voice hoarse from shouting. "I could not just sit by and watch. Most people would have." He was studying her now with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in dust, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her split riding skirt dusty and worn. "I do not even know your name." "Teresa Sinclair. I run the supply route between Bentonville and the homesteads." "Ryder Dalton," he said, though she already knew. "And I owe you a debt I cannot ever properly repay. This herd represents 5 years of my life, everything I own in this world." "You do not owe me anything," Teresa said, uncomfortable with the gratitude in his eyes. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said firmly, "they would not have, and we both know it." He looked back at his cattle, now mostly calmed and beginning to graze as if nothing had happened. What spooked them was a cougar. Big Tom. I caught a glimpse of him slinking off into the rocks. Could not take a shot without spooking the herd worse. "Cougar this time of day is unusual," Teresa observed, settling her rifle back in its scabbard. Her hands were still trembling slightly. "Probably driven down from the high country by the drought," Ryder said. "Water is getting scarce up in the mountains." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. "Miss Sinclair, would you allow me to at least offer you supper? My ranch is just over that ridge. It is not much, but I make a decent stew, and your horse could use some rest and water after what you just put her through." Teresa knew she should decline, knew that accepting such an invitation from a bachelor rancher was the kind of thing that got tongues wagging in a small town like Bentonville. But something in Ryder Dalton's winter sky eyes made her pause. There was loneliness there, deep and abiding, the kind that came from too many nights alone under the stars with only the wind for company. And if she was being honest with herself, she was curious about this mountain man who had appeared 5 years ago and kept himself apart from the town's social fabric. "I accept," she said, "but only if you let me help with the cooking. I have been accused of being a fair hand in the kitchen." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Ryder's mouth, visible even through his beard. "Deal. Let me just get a couple of my hands to watch the herd. They are in the north pasture and probably do not even know what just happened." As they rode toward his ranch, Teresa learned that Ryder employed 2 cowboys, brothers named Jake and Samuel Morrison, who helped him manage the herd and the land. The ranch itself was beautifully situated in a valley with a creek running through it, the Bighorn Mountains rising dramatic and purple in the distance. The main house was solidly built from logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that spoke of a man who planned to stay, to put down roots in this harsh and beautiful land. "You built all this yourself?" Teresa asked as they approached. "Mostly. The Morrison brothers helped with the barn raising, and I hired some men from town for the heaviest timber work on the house. But yes, most of it is my own hands." There was quiet pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had created something lasting. The inside of the house surprised Teresa. She had expected the typical bachelor chaos, but while the furnishings were simple and utilitarian, Everything was clean and well ordered. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace, actual books, more than she would have expected to find in a mountain man's home. She saw titles on animal husbandry, botany, even some poetry and classic literature. "You are a reader," she observed, moving to examine the collection more closely. "Long winters alone give a man plenty of time for books," Ryder said, sounding almost defensive. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. She made sure all her children could read and appreciate literature before we were old enough to leave home." "I meant no criticism," Teresa said quickly. "I love books myself. Finding good reading material out here has been one of my greatest challenges." She pulled out a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, handling it with the reverence it deserved. "This is a beautiful edition." "My mother's," Ryder said quietly. "One of the few things I kept after she passed. You are welcome to borrow it if you like, or any of the others." The offer, simple as it was, touched Teresa more than lavish words could have. Books were precious out here, treasured and protected. To offer to loan them to a stranger spoke of a generosity of spirit that the mountain man's gruff exterior had hidden. They worked together in the kitchen, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Teresa chopped vegetables while Ryder prepared the meat, their movements coordinated without conscious thought, as if they had done this 100 times before. They talked as they worked, tentative at first, then with growing ease. Teresa told him about her life back in Philadelphia, where her father had died leaving debts that would have forced her into a marriage with his creditor, a man 3 times her age with wandering hands and cruel eyes. She had taken what little money she could scrape together and bought passage west instead, preferring uncertainty to that particular certainty. "That took courage," Ryder said, stirring the pot over the fire. "Most women would have felt they had no choice but to accept such an arrangement." "I would rather die free than live as that man's property," Teresa said simply. "Out here I can make my own way. It is not easy, but it is mine. Every choice, every consequence mine to own." Ryder nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "That is why I came down from the mountains. Up there, trapping, I was free in a way few men ever know. But there is a loneliness to that freedom after a while. I wanted to build something, create something that would last beyond my own life. This ranch, it is my way of putting down roots while keeping that freedom I found in the high country." They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that seemed to set the mountains on fire. The stew was good, hearty and warming, and Teresa could not remember the last time a meal had tasted so fine. Perhaps it was the company, the easy conversation that flowed between them, the way Ryder listened when she spoke, really listened, his full attention on her words rather than planning his own next statement. "I should head back," Teresa said reluctantly as the last light faded from the sky. "It is a 2-hour ride to town, and people will talk if I return too late." "Let them talk," Ryder said, then seemed to catch himself. "I apologize. That was forward of me. Of course you are concerned about your reputation." "But Miss Sinclair, Teresa, if I may be so bold, I would very much like to see you again. Perhaps you would allow me to call on you properly in town." Teresa felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "I would like that very much. Though I should warn you, I live in a boarding house run by Mrs. Abernathy, and she takes her role as moral guardian very seriously. You will be subjected to intense scrutiny." "I have faced down grizzly bears, Miss Sinclair. I believe I can handle Mrs. Abernathy." This time there was definitely a smile beneath that beard, and Teresa found herself wanting to see it more clearly, to know what Ryder Dalton looked like when he truly smiled. He rode with her back to town, despite her protests, unwilling to let her make the journey alone in the dark. They talked the whole way, words coming easier now, learning each other in the way of people who recognize something familiar in a stranger's eyes. Ryder told her about the mountains, about winters when the snow piled so high it covered the cabin windows, about the silence that was so profound you could hear your own heartbeat, about the moment he shot his first bear and knew he had truly become a mountain man. Teresa told him about the supply route, about the families she had come to know, the children who ran out to greet her when she arrived, the elderly widow who always insisted on giving her tea and cookies, the young couple struggling to make their homestead work who reminded her that courage came in many forms. When they reached Bentonville, Ryder insisted on seeing her to Mrs. Abernathy's door. The boarding house matron opened the door with her usual stern expression, but even she seemed slightly mollified by Ryder's polite manners, an obvious concern for Teresa's well-being. "I will call on you Sunday afternoon if that is acceptable," Ryder said, holding his hat in his hands. "It is very acceptable," Teresa replied, aware of Mrs. Abernathy's keen ears taking in every word. "Thank you for supper, Mr. Dalton, and for the conversation." "The thanks are entirely mine, Miss Sinclair. You saved everything I have worked for these past 5 years. Sharing a meal and some talk seems a poor repayment." Teresa watched him ride away into the darkness, and Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat meaningfully behind her. "That is Ryder Dalton," the older woman said, not quite making it a question. "The mountain man with the ranch at the base of the Bighorns." "Yes, madam," Teresa confirmed, closing the door and turning to face the inevitable interrogation. "He keeps to himself mostly. Polite enough when he comes to town, but not much for socializing." Mrs. Abernathy studied Teresa with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What brings him calling on you?" Teresa explained about the stampede, about riding into the panicked herd to turn them from the ravine. Mrs. Abernathy's stern expression softened slightly. "That was brave. Foolish, perhaps, but brave." She paused. "He seems a decent man from what little anyone knows of him. But you be careful, Teresa. A man who has lived alone in the mountains that long, he may not be suited for civilized company." "I will be careful," Teresa promised, though in her heart she knew it was already too late for careful. Something had passed between her and Ryder Dalton out there on the prairie, some recognition, some spark that careful could not touch. The days until Sunday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Teresa completed her supply routes, delivered goods to the scattered homesteads, and tried not to think about winter sky eyes and strong hands that could build a home from raw timber. She failed spectacularly. Every night she lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house and remembered the easy way they had worked together in his kitchen, the flow of conversation that had felt as natural as breathing. Sunday finally arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze that carried the scent of prairie grass and sage. Teresa changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, then changed it again because she did not want to seem like she was trying too hard, then changed back because she did want to look nice, and there was no shame in that. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared the parlor for receiving callers, which meant the good doilies were out on the furniture, and the curtains had been tied back to let in maximum light and provide minimum privacy. It was all very proper and entirely predictable. Ryder arrived exactly on time, dressed in what were clearly his town clothes, his beard neatly trimmed and his hair combed back. He carried a bouquet of wildflowers that he must have gathered himself from the mountain meadows, and the gesture touched Teresa more than hothouse roses ever could. Mrs. Abernathy served tea and tiny cakes, then positioned herself in the corner with her knitting, the perfect chaperone, present but ostensibly not listening. Teresa and Ryder made polite small talk for the first few minutes, both acutely aware of their audience, before Teresa decided she had enough of social niceties. "Have you had any more trouble with that cougar?" she asked. Ryder seemed relieved to be on familiar ground. "No, though I have seen his tracks near the creek. I have warned the Morrison brothers to keep their rifles close when they are out with the herd. A sensible precaution. A big Tom could do serious damage if he develops a taste for beef." They talked about the ranch, about the supply business, about the growing tension between the big ranchers and the homesteaders over water rights and grazing land. It was a problem all over Wyoming Territory, one that sometimes turned violent when men felt their livelihoods threatened. "I try to stay out of those disputes," Ryder said. "My land has good water from the creek, and I have enough grazing for my herd without encroaching on anyone else's claim. But I know it cannot stay peaceful forever. Too many people coming west, all of them wanting their piece of land and prosperity. Progress brings complications," Teresa agreed. "Though I cannot fault people for wanting better lives. Is that not why we are all here in the end, seeking something better than what we left behind?" "True enough." Ryder's eyes were on her face, warm and intense. "Though sometimes what we find is better than anything we dared hope for." Teresa felt heat rise in her cheeks, and Mrs. Abernathy's knitting needles clicked a bit faster in the corner, but the older woman said nothing. The afternoon passed too quickly, filled with conversation and shared laughter and the growing awareness that what had sparked between them in his kitchen was not fading but intensifying. When Ryder finally rose to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Sinclair, there is a dance in town next Saturday night. Would you do me the honor of attending with me?" "I would be delighted, Mr. Dalton," Teresa said, her heart beating faster at the thought. After he left, Mrs. Abernathy set down her knitting and fixed Teresa with a knowing look. "That man is courting you, proper girl, and unless I miss my guess, you are not opposed to being courted." "No, madam," Teresa admitted. "I am not opposed at all." "He is a good bit older than you," Mrs. Abernathy observed. Teresa had turned 21 just last month, and Ryder had mentioned being 29 during their conversation. 8 years is not so much," Teresa said, "and he has the maturity and stability that comes with those years. He is not a wild boy but a man who knows his own mind." Mrs. Abernathy nodded slowly. "Just make sure you know your own mind as well, Teresa. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, especially out here where life is hard enough without being bound to the wrong person." "I know my mind," Teresa said quietly. "I have known it since I rode into that stampede and saw him trying to save his herd. There is something in Ryder Dalton that calls to something in me. I cannot explain it better than that." "Sometimes the best things cannot be explained," Mrs. Abernathy said, her stern features softening. "Sometimes they just are, and the wise woman accepts that and follows her heart." The week passed more quickly than the previous one, perhaps because Teresa kept herself busy with extra work, trying not to count the hours until Saturday night. She completed her regular supply route, then took on extra deliveries for the general store, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. On Thursday, she was returning from a delivery to a homestead about 10 miles north of town when she saw smoke rising in the distance, too much smoke to be a campfire or cooking fire. She urged her mare toward it, a sense of dread building in her chest. As she crested a rise, she saw the source. A small homestead cabin was burning, flames licking through the roof, and a woman was standing in the yard screaming. Teresa rode hard toward the scene, dismounting before her horse had fully stopped. "What happened? Is anyone inside, my babies?" The woman sobbed, reaching toward the burning cabin. "My 2 boys, they were napping. I was just outside for a moment hanging laundry and I do not know what happened, the stove maybe, and now I cannot get to them. The door is blocked with fallen timber. Please, God, please help them." Teresa did not hesitate. She ran toward the cabin, feeling the heat of the flames even from yards away. The door was indeed blocked by a fallen roof beam, but there was a window on the side, small but possibly large enough. She grabbed a water bucket from near the well, dumped it over herself, and ran to the window. The glass was already broken from the heat. Teresa knocked out the remaining shards with her elbow, heedless of the cuts, and hoisted herself through the opening. The smoke inside was thick and black, burning her lungs, making her eyes water until she could barely see. She dropped to the floor where the air was slightly clearer and crawled toward where she heard crying. Two small boys, perhaps 3 and 5 years old, huddled in the corner furthest from the flames. Teresa grabbed them both, one under each arm, and scrambled back toward the window. The younger one was limp and not crying, and Teresa felt terror grip her heart, but she could not stop, could not check. She just had to get them out. She shoved the older boy through the window first, heard hands grabbing him, then pushed the younger one out. She was climbing through herself when part of the roof collapsed behind her, sending a shower of sparks and embers over her back. She felt pain, sharp and fierce, but adrenaline pushed her through the window and she fell hard onto the ground outside. The mother was sobbing, clutching her boys. The older one was coughing but conscious. The younger one was still and pale. Teresa crawled to him, forced her smoke-seared lungs to work, and began the rescue breathing she had learned from a doctor back east. Breathe into the small mouth, watch the chest rise. Wait, breathe again. After what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute, the boy coughed, choked, and began to wail. The sweetest sound Teresa had ever heard. "You need to get them to the doctor in town," Teresa managed to rasp out. "Right now. That smoke, it can damage their lungs." "I have no horse, no wagon," the mother sobbed. "My husband took them to Bentonville for supplies 2 days ago. He should be back today, but I do not know when." "Take my mare," Teresa said, though standing up sent waves of pain through her back where the embers had burned through her dress. "Ride hard. Get them to Doc Henderson." The woman hesitated only a moment before nodding, gathering her boys and mounting Teresa's horse with the practiced ease of someone born to frontier life. She rode away at a gallop, leaving Teresa alone beside the burning cabin. Teresa watched the flames consume what had been someone's home, someone's dream, and felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. Her back hurt fiercely now, her lungs burned with every breath, and her hands were bleeding from the broken glass. She walked to the well, drew up a bucket and dumped it over her head, washing away the soot and sweat and blood. She was sitting on the ground, trying to gather the strength to walk the 10 miles back to town, when she heard hoofbeats. Multiple riders coming fast. She looked up to see Ryder Dalton leading a group of men, including the Morrison brothers and several townspeople. Ryder was off his horse before it fully stopped, running to her side. "Teresa, my God, are you hurt?" "We saw the smoke from town, and someone said they saw you riding this direction earlier." "The children," Teresa managed through her raw throat. "Did they make it to town? Are they safe?" "The mother and boys arrived about 20 minutes ago. Both children are alive thanks to you. Doc Henderson says they will be fine." Ryder was examining her with frantic eyes, seeing the burns on her back, the cuts on her hands and arms. "You went into the burning building. The boys were inside. There was no choice." "There is always a choice," Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion. "You could have chosen safety. You could have chosen not to risk yourself. But that is not who you are, is it? You see someone in need and you ride toward the danger, not away from it." He lifted her as gently as if she were made of spun glass and carried her to his horse. We are getting you to Doc Henderson right now. I can walk, Teresa protested weakly. You can also let someone help you for once, Ryder said firmly. Let me help you, Teresa, please. She stopped protesting and let her head rest against his chest as he mounted his horse with her in his arms, holding her secure as they rode back toward Bentonville. The other men stayed behind to make sure the fire did not spread to the surrounding grassland, but Ryder never considered staying. His only thought was getting Teresa to medical help. Doc Henderson was waiting when they arrived, having been alerted by the homesteader's wife. He examined Teresa's burns and cuts, clucking his tongue in a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You are lucky those burns are not worse," he said, applying salve that stung fiercely. "Another few seconds in there and you might have been killed. As it is, you are going to be very sore for a few days and you will have some scarring on your back. The cuts will heal clean if we keep them from getting infected." Ryder stood nearby, his face a mask of controlled worry. When Doc Henderson finally finished bandaging Teresa and declared her free to go with strict instructions to rest, Ryder stepped forward. "She is coming home with me," he announced, brooking no argument. "My ranch is closer than town, and I can make sure she follows the doctor's orders." "Mr. Dalton, that would be highly improper," Teresa started to say, but Mrs. Abernathy, who had arrived sometime during the treatment, interrupted. "Actually, I think it is a fine idea. I will come along as chaperone to protect the girl's reputation, but she needs quiet and rest, not the noise and bustle of the boarding house. You have a spare room, Mr. Dalton?" "I do, madam, clean and comfortable." "Then it is settled. Teresa, you are not to argue. You saved 2 children's lives today. The least you can do is let us take care of you in return." Teresa found herself bundled into a wagon, lying on blankets with Mrs. Abernathy sitting beside her and Ryder driving. The journey to his ranch was agonizing, every bump in the road sending pain through her burned back, but she bit her lip and endured it. Ryder carried her into the spare bedroom, which was indeed clean and comfortable, with a real bed and curtains on the window. Mrs. Abernathy helped her into a nightgown, careful of the bandages, and tucked her into bed like a child. Over the next 3 days, Teresa discovered a side of Ryder Dalton she had not seen before. He was a surprisingly gentle caretaker, bringing her meals on a tray, reading to her from his books, changing her bandages with hands that were both strong and tender. Mrs. Abernathy was there during the day, maintaining propriety, but she returned to town each night, trusting Ryder to be a gentleman. On the 3rd day, Teresa was finally able to sit up without too much pain. She was in the main room, wrapped in a quilt on the sofa, watching Ryder prepare dinner when she finally said what had been on her mind. "You have been very kind to me, more than kind." Ryder turned from the stove, his winter sky eyes serious. "Teresa, when I saw that smoke and heard you had been riding in that direction, I felt fear like I have never known. Not in all my years in the mountains, facing bears and wolves and blizzards. The thought that you might be hurt, might be in danger, it near stopped my heart." He crossed to her, knelt beside the sofa so they were eye to eye. "When you rode into that stampede to save my cattle, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met, but it was more than that. I looked at you, covered in dust and glory, and I knew you were fearless enough. Fearless enough for this life, for this hard and beautiful land. Fearless enough to stand beside a man like me, who does not know fancy words or proper courting but knows his own heart. And my heart, Teresa Sinclair, belongs to you, has belonged to you since that moment." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Ryder, I have been alone for so long. Since I left Philadelphia, I have relied on no one but myself. I thought that was strength, thought that was what I needed. But these past days, letting you care for me, I have learned something. True strength is not just about standing alone. It is about knowing when to let someone stand with you. She reached out and touched his bearded cheek, feeling the roughness against her palm. I love you, Ryder Dalton. I think I have loved you since I saw you trying to save your herd, since we cooked together in your kitchen, since you offered me your mother's book of poetry. You are not alone in your feelings. Ryder released a breath that sounded like it had been held for days. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sweet, mindful of her injuries, but conveying all the emotion he could not put into words. Teresa kissed him back, feeling something click into place in her heart. Some piece she had not known was missing until this mountain man had shown her where it belonged. When they finally pulled apart, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Teresa. Be my wife. Build this life with me. I know it is fast. I know people will say we have not known each other long enough, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Yes, Teresa said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. I will build this life with you and face whatever comes together. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Bentonville, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. The homesteader's wife, whose children Teresa had saved, stood up as her matron of honor, tears streaming down her face as she watched Teresa pledge her life to the mountain man, who had found his heart in a woman brave enough to ride into stampedes and burning buildings. Mrs. Abernathy cried too, though she would deny it later, and the Morrison brothers stood up with Ryder, proud to be part of their boss's special day. The whole town celebrated afterward with a dance and feast, and Teresa laughed until her sides hurt as Ryder spun her around the floor with surprising grace for such a big man. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, breathless and happy. "My mother insisted all her children learn proper social skills," Ryder admitted. "She said mountain men were still men, and men should know how to treat a lady properly." "Your mother was a wise woman. She would have loved you," Ryder said softly. "She always told me that the right woman would be the one who could match my strength with her own, who would not be cowed by the hardness of this life but would embrace it. She said I should look for a woman who was fearless enough, and I found her." Teresa moved into the ranch house and discovered that building a life with Ryder Dalton was everything she had hoped and more. They worked together seamlessly, whether they were cooking in the kitchen, working with the cattle, or managing the business of the ranch. The Morrison brothers treated Teresa with respect and genuine affection, happy to see their employer so content. The first winter was harsh, with snow that piled high and temperatures that dropped so low it hurt to breathe. But inside the solid log house Ryder had built, they stayed warm, reading together by the fire, talking late into the night, learning each other in all the ways married people do. Teresa discovered that Ryder had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh until she cried, that he could recite poetry from memory, that he sang old folk songs while he worked and had a surprisingly pleasant voice. Ryder learned that Teresa was fiercely independent, but also generous beyond measure, that she had a gift for befriending everyone she met, that her fearlessness came not from a lack of understanding danger, but from a deep conviction that some things were worth the risk. He learned that she talked in her sleep sometimes, that she loved coffee strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe, and that she could outride most men he knew in the spring. Teresa discovered she was pregnant. Ryder was so overcome with joy that he picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, terrified he might have hurt the baby. "Ryder, I am pregnant, not made of porcelain," Teresa laughed. "You can still hold your wife." "Our child," Ryder said wonderingly, placing his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child, Teresa. a piece of you and me together. Their son was born in late autumn of 1878 during the first snow of the season. Doc Henderson attended the birth along with Mrs. Abernathy and the homesteader's wife, Mary Jennings, who had become one of Teresa's closest friends. It was a difficult labor, long and painful, but when Teresa finally held her son in her arms, she knew every moment of pain had been worth it. "What should we name him?" Ryder asked, looking at his son with awe and not a little fear. The baby seemed impossibly tiny in his large hands. "Robert," Teresa said without hesitation. "After my father, Robert Dalton." "Robert Dalton," Ryder repeated, testing the name. "It is a strong name, a good name." Little Robert grew into a sturdy boy with his father's build and his mother's fearless spirit. By the time he was 3, he was following Ryder around the ranch, mimicking his father's every move, learning about cattle and horses and the land. 2 years after Robert came a daughter, whom they named Rose for the wild roses that grew on the mountainsides. She was delicate-looking, but had a will of iron and a laugh that could light up the darkest day. Ryder doted on his daughter shamelessly, and Teresa teased him about being wrapped around such tiny fingers. The ranch prospered over the years. Ryder's careful management and Teresa's business acumen made them one of the most successful operations in the area. They hired more help as the herd grew, and Ryder began breeding horses as well as raising cattle, discovering a talent for it that brought in additional income. Teresa continued her supply route until Rose was born, then handed the business over to a young man from town, but stayed involved in the planning and organization. She became known throughout the area as someone who could solve problems, mediate disputes, and offer sound advice. People came to her when they needed help, knowing she would do what she could, and Ryder supported her efforts fully, proud of the woman she was. The water disputes that had been simmering when they married came to a head in 1882, with several violent confrontations between big ranchers and homesteaders. Ryder and Teresa worked tirelessly to find peaceful solutions, opening their creek to neighbors during the worst of the drought, helping negotiate agreements that let everyone access the water they needed to survive. "You are going to make enemies among the big ranchers," one of the Morrison brothers warned Ryder. "They do not like that you are siding with the homesteaders." "I am not siding with anyone except common sense and decency," Ryder replied. "There is enough water for everyone if people stop being greedy and start being neighborly. And if the big ranchers want to make an enemy of me over that, so be it. I have faced down worse." Teresa loved him even more for his principled stand, for his refusal to be bullied or bought. Together they became a force for good in the community, respected and admired even by those who disagreed with their positions. When Robert turned 10 and Rose 8, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was older, and the pregnancy was harder, but she faced it with the same fearlessness she had brought to everything else in her life. Their third child, another boy they named Samuel after the older Morrison brother who had become like family, was born healthy and strong in the spring of 1886. 3 children, Ryder marveled, holding Samuel while Robert and Rose crowded around to see their new brother. "We have built quite a family, Teresa." "We have built a life," Teresa corrected, looking around at her husband and children, at the solid house they had made into a home, at the mountains rising purple in the distance. "A good life, full of love and purpose. Everything I hoped for when I came west and so much more." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. The Morrison brothers both married and started their own families on parcels of land Ryder sold them at far below market value, keeping them close and ensuring the help he needed was always nearby. Mrs. Abernathy passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, and Teresa wept at her funeral, grateful for the stern but kind woman who had looked after her when she first arrived in Bentonville. Robert grew into a fine young man with his father's size and strength, but also his mother's quick mind and compassionate heart. He took to ranching naturally, learning everything Ryder could teach him about cattle and horses and land management. Rose proved to have a gift with horses that exceeded even her father's, and she began training them for sale, developing a reputation throughout Wyoming Territory for producing reliable, well-trained mounts. Samuel was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book, asking questions about everything. Teresa saw her own love of learning reflected in him and made sure he had access to every book she could acquire, every scrap of knowledge available. In 1889, when Teresa was 34 and Ryder 42, Wyoming Territory became the state of Wyoming. The celebration in Bentonville lasted 3 days, with dancing and speeches and more food than any of them had seen in one place. Ryder and Teresa stood together watching the festivities, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "We have been married 12 years, Ryder said quietly. 12 of the best years of my life. Do you remember what I said to you when you were recovering from the fire? That I knew you were fearless enough. I remember everything you said to me that day," Teresa replied. "I remember thinking that I had finally found someone who saw me, truly saw me, and was not afraid of what he saw." "I am still not afraid," Ryder said, turning to face her fully. "I am in awe. Awe of your strength, your courage, your endless capacity for love. You saved my cattle that day, but you saved me too, Teresa. Saved me from a lonely life, gave me purpose and family and joy. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears that seemed to come more easily as she grew older. "You gave me a home, Ryder. Not just this house, beautiful as it is, but a true home. A place to belong, to put down roots, to build something lasting. I love you with all my heart, and I always will." They kissed there under the Wyoming sky, surrounded by celebration, and their children saw and smiled, knowing their parents' love story was the foundation on which their own lives had been built. More years passed, bringing both challenges and triumphs. A harsh winter in 1893 decimated many herds in the area, but Ryder's careful preparation and Teresa's insistence on stockpiling feed meant their cattle survived better than most. They were able to help their neighbors through the crisis, earning even more respect and goodwill. Robert married in 1895 to a sweet girl from town named Elizabeth, and they gave Ryder and Teresa their first grandchild, a boy named Ryder Jr., the following year. The elder Ryder was so touched to have a grandchild named after him that he could barely speak when he first held the baby. Just stood there with tears running down into his beard while Teresa laughed and cried and held them both. Rose married a veterinarian who had come to the area in 1897, drawn by the reputation of the horses she trained. His name was David Sheffield, and Ryder approved of him after a single conversation about proper care for livestock in harsh climates. They built a house on the ranch property and continued the horse breeding operation together, expanding it until they were shipping trained horses all over the West. Samuel left for college back east in 1898, the first member of either Ryder's or Teresa's family to pursue higher education. It was bittersweet watching him go, but they were proud of his thirst for knowledge and supported his dreams fully. He promised to return to Wyoming, to bring what he learned back to the place that had raised him, and both Ryder and Teresa believed him. As the new century dawned in 1900, Ryder and Teresa were in their mid-40s and 50s respectively, both showing the signs of a life lived fully and well. Ryder's beard was more gray than dark now, and Teresa had silver threads running through her hair, but they were both still strong, still active in the running of the ranch and the life of their community. One evening in early summer of 1901, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their grandchildren, now numbering 4 with Rose having recently given birth to twins, were playing in the yard under the watchful eye of their parents. The sounds of laughter and joy filled the air. "You ever think about that day?" Teresa asked softly. "The day of the stampede." "I think about it often," Ryder admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing everything and how a woman I did not even know rode into danger to save it all. I think about how that single moment of courage on your part changed the entire trajectory of my life." "It changed mine too," Teresa said. "I thought I knew what I wanted when I came west. Independence, freedom, the ability to make my own choices. And I found all of that. But I also found something I did not know I needed. Love. Partnership. A family built not on obligation but on choice and commitment and genuine affection." Ryder took her hand, his thumb rubbing gently over her knuckles in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing over their years together. "If I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment led me to you. And you, Teresa Dalton, are worth everything I have ever endured." Teresa turned to kiss him, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 24 years of marriage, 3 children, 4 grandchildren, and a love that had only grown deeper with time. "And you, Ryder Dalton, are the best decision I ever made. Better than coming west, better than taking that supply route, better than anything. Choosing to love you, choosing to build this life with you, that is my greatest accomplishment." They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, watching their grandchildren play and their children laugh, surrounded by the fruits of a life well lived. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the creek babbled its endless song, and the ranch they had built together stretched out green and prosperous in every direction. In 1905, Samuel returned from his studies with a degree in agricultural science and a determination to help Wyoming ranchers adapt their practices to the changing times. He set up an office in Bentonville and began consulting with local ranchers, using the knowledge he had gained to help them improve their operations. Ryder was his first client and his most devoted supporter, implementing Samuel's suggestions and seeing real improvements in both herd health and grazing land quality. Robert took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Ryder grew older, but the elder Dalton still rode out most days, still checked on the cattle, still worked alongside his sons and grandsons. Teresa had slowed down some too, but she was still the heart of the family, the one everyone came to with their problems and their triumphs, the steady center around which they all orbited. On a beautiful spring day in 1908, Ryder and Teresa celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from all over the county. The ranch was filled with friends and family, with food and music and dancing. Robert gave a toast that left hardly a dry eye in the crowd, talking about the example his parents had set, the way they had built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love and integrity and community service. "My father came down from the mountains to build something lasting," Robert said, raising his glass. "And my mother came west to find freedom and independence. Together, they built something neither could have achieved alone. They built a family, a home, a life that has touched everyone in this room. They showed us all what true partnership looks like, what fearless love can accomplish. To Ryder and Teresa Dalton, the finest parents and the best example anyone could ask for. The toast was echoed by everyone present, and Ryder pulled Teresa close, kissing her soundly to the cheers and laughter of their loved ones. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, they lay in their bed, the same bed Ryder had built when he first constructed the house, and talked in the darkness. 30 years, Teresa marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you asked me to marry you after I spent those days recovering here. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time when you were not part of my life. I know exactly what you mean, Ryder said, pulling her closer. You are woven into every part of my existence now. I cannot imagine who I would be without you. Do not want to imagine it. We are not done yet, Teresa said firmly. We have many good years ahead of us still. Grandchildren to watch grow up, maybe even great-grandchildren if we are blessed. Adventures yet to come. Adventures, Ryder chuckled. Is that what you call sitting on the porch watching the world go by? With you, everything is an adventure, even the quiet moments. They made love that night with the tenderness and familiarity of long marriage, knowing each other's bodies as well as their own, taking pleasure in the connection that went so much deeper than physical. Afterward, Teresa fell asleep in Ryder's arms, feeling safe and loved and content. The years continued their inevitable march. More grandchildren were born, and the first great-grandchild arrived in 1912, when Robert and Elizabeth's oldest son married and started his own family. Ryder was 70 years old by then, and Teresa 67, but they were both still sharp of mind and reasonably healthy of body, still taking joy in each new addition to the family they had created. In 1914, news of war in Europe reached Wyoming, seeming distant and unreal in the peaceful mountains and prairies. But when America entered the conflict in 1917, 2 of their grandsons enlisted, determined to do their part. It was a difficult time, filled with worry and fear, but both young men returned home safely in 1919, changed by what they had seen but whole and alive. Ryder's health began to fail in 1920. He had never been sick a day in his life, had always been strong as an ox, but time eventually catches everyone. His heart was weakening, and he tired more easily, though he fought against the limitations of age with the same stubbornness he had brought to every other challenge. Teresa nursed him with the same fierce devotion she had brought to everything she loved, refusing to let him see her fear, staying strong for him as he had always been strong for her. They spent long hours together on the porch or by the fire, talking about their life, remembering the good times, marveling at how blessed they had been. I am not afraid of dying, Ryder told her one evening as they watched the sunset. I have lived a full life, a good life. I have been loved by the most remarkable woman I have ever known, raised fine children, built something that will last beyond me. What more could any man ask? I am not ready to let you go, Teresa said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts to stay strong. I know it is selfish, but I am not ready. You will never have to let me go entirely, Ryder said, taking her hand. I will be in every sunset over those mountains, every breeze that carries the scent of sage, every story our grandchildren tell their children. I will be in your heart, Teresa, always. And when your time comes, whenever that may be, I will be waiting. We will have eternity together. Ryder Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep on a beautiful autumn morning in 1921, with Teresa beside him and their children nearby. He was 73 years old and had lived to see his family grow to include 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. His funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming, a testament to the respect and affection he had earned over his lifetime. Teresa mourned him deeply, but did not let grief consume her. She knew Ryder would not have wanted that. Instead, she threw herself into helping with the ranch, being there for her children and grandchildren, continuing the work they had started together. She told stories about Ryder, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as well. On a spring day in 1924, Teresa was out riding the range as she had done countless times over the decades. She stopped at the spot where she had first saved Ryder's cattle from the Stampede, where their story had truly begun. She sat on her horse and remembered that day, remembered the fear and the exhilaration, remembered seeing Ryder's face when he realized what she had done. "I miss you," she said aloud to the wind and the mountains and the memory of the man she had loved for so long. "Every single day I miss you, but I am grateful too. Grateful for every moment we had, every joy we shared, every challenge we faced together. You were right, my love. You are in every sunset, every breeze, every beat of my heart, and I will carry you with me until we meet again." Teresa Dalton lived another 3 years, active and engaged right up until the end. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1927, at the age of 72, in the same bed where Ryder had died, in the house they had made their home. Her children found her with a smile on her face and a book of Wordsworth's poetry, the same edition Ryder had offered to loan her on their first meeting, lying open on her chest. They buried her beside Ryder on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains they had both loved so well. The gravestone was simple but said everything that needed to be said. Teresa Sinclair Dalton, 1855–1927, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Fearless and true. Ryder Dalton, 1848–1921, beloved husband, father, grandfather, mountain man and gentleman, together always. The ranch continued to thrive under Robert's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The story of how Ryder and Teresa met, how a woman rode into a stampede to save a stranger's cattle and ended up finding the love of her life, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The house Ryder built still stands today, preserved and maintained by the Dalton family, a monument to one man's determination to create something lasting, and one woman's courage to risk everything for what was right. The creek still runs clear through the valley, the mountains still stand eternal against the sky, and if you listen carefully on a quiet evening, you might almost hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of voices, the whispers of a love story that began with a stampede and lasted beyond death itself. The Dalton family grew and spread throughout Wyoming and beyond, but they never forgot where they came from, never forgot the mountain man and the fearless woman who started it all. Every year on the anniversary of Ryder and Teresa's wedding, the family gathers at the ranch for a celebration, telling the old stories, remembering the foundations on which their legacy was built. And sometimes, when the light is just right, and the wind carries the scent of sage and wildflowers, it almost seems like you can see them there on the porch. A big man with winter sky eyes and a bearded face, and a woman with dark hair and a smile that could light up the world, sitting together watching the sunset, hands clasped, surrounded by the love they built and the life they created together always, just as they promised all those years ago.